Evelyn didn't waste precious oxygen asking questions. She dropped her metal clipboard, the sharp clatter echoing loudly off the linoleum floor, and sprinted for the heavy freight elevator at the end of the corridor. She hammered her fist against the rusted metal call button, her mind racing back through time to a blood-soaked makeshift surgical tent in Kandahar 5 years ago. General William Hayes, who had been a colonel at the time, had been brought into her unit with a shredded chest and a jagged piece of mortar shrapnel lodged perilously close to his spinal cord. During the grueling, chaotic medevac, a highly specialized experimental biventricular pacemaker had been inserted by a DARPA field surgeon to keep the man's failing heart beating. Evelyn had been the nurse tasked with maintaining it during the transport, memorizing the bizarre, classified sequence of magnetic overrides and specific electrical inputs required to reset the delicate machinery if it ever failed. It was meant to be a temporary battlefield fix, but the device had become a permanent part of the general's anatomy, a closely guarded secret known only to the general himself, his loyal chief of staff, and the trauma nurse who had refused to let him die through the darkest, most desperate night of his military career. The freight elevator doors finally parted with an agonizingly slow groan, and Evelyn bolted down the pristine white corridors of the main hospital floor. She slammed through the swinging double doors of the emergency department, the chaotic din of advanced trauma care hitting her like a physical shockwave. Trauma 1 was a scene of absolute terrifying pandemonium. General Hayes lay flat on the stainless steel table, his skin an ashen, lifeless gray. The monitors above his head were screaming a continuous erratic alarm that signaled impending cardiac death. Dr. Harrison Montgomery stood frozen by the head of the bed, the heavy defibrillator paddles dangling limply from his trembling hands. The usually immaculate, arrogant surgeon looked small and entirely stripped of his god complex. He was paralyzed by the sheer naked terror of a man who suddenly realized he was entirely out of his depth. Beside him, Colonel Jonathan Miller was dangerously close to drawing his sidearm, his face inches from Montgomery's. Step away from the table. Dr. Colonel Miller barked his voice, carrying the lethal, unyielding authority of a career military officer. Montgomery blinked, stammering defensively. "I am the chief cardiovascular surgeon of this facility. You cannot order me." Evelyn violently shoved her way through the paralyzed, terrified medical team, grabbing a pair of sterile surgical gloves from the wall dispenser and snapping them over her wrists. "Move, Montgomery!" she commanded, her voice cutting through the panic with icy, absolute precision. She didn't wait for his compliance. She physically shouldered the high-priced civilian contractor out of the way. Montgomery stumbled backward, hitting a stainless steel instrument tray with a loud crash. "Nurse Parker," he gasped, his face flushing with a chaotic mix of outrage and profound relief. "You are officially suspended. You have absolutely no medical authority in this room." Colonel Miller cut him off with a vicious, silencing glare. "She has my authority, doctor. Shut your mouth and step back, or I will personally have the MPS drag you out of this hospital in handcuffs for treason." Evelyn ignored the posturing and the politics. Her eyes were locked exclusively on the monitor and the dying man on the table. "Brenda, I need a high-frequency medical magnet, the heavy-duty one from the MRI preparation room. Now," she shouted, her voice echoing off the tile. "And draw up 50 milligrams of amiodarone. Push it fast, followed by an immediate saline flush. We have exactly 40 seconds before his brain is deprived of oxygen past the point of no return." Brenda, galvanized by Evelyn's commanding presence, sprinted toward the secure supply cabinet. Evelyn placed her bare hands flat on the general's chest, feeling the chaotic, terrifying flutter of his failing heart beneath his broken ribs. It felt exactly like a bird trapped in a cage, frantically beating its wings before collapsing into exhaustion. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, tuning out the noise, the hospital, and the arrogant surgeon behind her. This wasn't a sterile hospital in Maryland anymore. This was the unforgiving desert, and she was going to bring him back. Brenda rushed back and slapped the heavy circular medical magnet into Evelyn's waiting hand. "Amiodarone is in," the junior nurse confirmed, pushing the syringe with trembling fingers. Evelyn leaned over the table and positioned the heavy magnet over the general's left shoulder blade, exactly over the subcutaneous insertion point of the spinal leads. "Everyone step back and clear the bed," she ordered. She tapped the magnet against the skin in a highly specific, irregular rhythm. 3 short, rapid taps, an agonizingly long 5-second hold, and 2 final, sharp taps. It was a manual override sequence designed by military engineers, a protocol completely absent from standard civilian medical textbooks. The entire trauma room held its collective breath. The chaotic, jagged scribbles on the heart monitor suddenly flatlined. A horrific, sustained singular beep filled the silent room. Montgomery let out a harsh, mocking breath. "You killed him, Parker. You just stopped the base commander's heart." Evelyn didn't flinch. Her hands remained steady. "Wait for it," she whispered, her eyes glued to the dark screen. 1 excruciating second passed, then 2, then 3. Just as Colonel Miller's hardened face began to crumple into devastating despair, the monitor beeped. It was a sharp, singular sound. Then another. The long, terrifying flatline jumped, forming a jagged, perfectly paced spike. Beep, beep, beep. Normal sinus rhythm. The general's chest heaved upward as a ragged, desperate breath escaped his lips. His blood pressure numbers on the digital display began to climb steadily out of the fatal danger zone. A collective gasp of sheer relief swept through Trauma 1, followed by spontaneous, breathless murmurs from the nurses and residents. Evelyn let out a long, shuddering exhale, stepping back from the operating table and wiping a bead of cold sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist. She turned to Dr. Robert Sterling, the anesthesiologist from Corporal Miller's botched surgery, who had just rushed into the room upon hearing the code red. "Bob," Evelyn said, her voice steady and resolute. "His rhythm is locked in, but he has massive internal bleeding and severe pulmonary contusions. He needs immediate thoracic repair. Can you get Dr. Gregory Harding down here right now?" "Harding is scrubbing in as we speak," Dr. Sterling confirmed, casting a deeply satisfying, entirely disdainful look at the disgraced Montgomery. "We're bypassing the cardiovascular department and going straight to the military trauma surgeons. You did it, Evie. You saved him." The subsequent surgery lasted for 7 grueling, blood-soaked hours. Dr. Gregory Harding, a seasoned, no-nonsense military trauma surgeon, meticulously repaired the devastating blunt force damage to the general's lungs and expertly stabilized the shattered flail chest. Evelyn remained fiercely by the general's side in the intensive recovery wing the entire time, meticulously monitoring the complex temperamental pacemaking system. She adamantly refused to yield her post to anyone, drinking bitter black coffee and watching the steady rise and fall of the commander's chest. During those long, tense hours in the dark, the atmosphere within the hospital began to undergo a massive seismic shift. The unbelievable story of what had transpired in Trauma 1 spread like wildfire through the corridors, becoming a blazing inferno of hospital gossip that ruthlessly incinerated Dr. Harrison Montgomery's carefully constructed arrogant reputation. The nurses, the scrub technicians, and the junior doctors, everyone who had suffered in silence under Montgomery's tyrannical, degrading reign suddenly began to speak up. Whispers in the break room quickly turned into formal documented complaints. More importantly, the previously terrified and silent witnesses to young Corporal Miller's tragic death finally found their courage. The invincible, untouchable civilian contractor had shown his true colors under the crushing pressure of a real emergency, and the entire medical staff had watched him crumble into incompetence, while the unjustly exiled trauma nurse stepped up and saved the day. 3 days later, as the morning sun broke through the heavy rain clouds, General William Hayes finally opened his eyes. The VIP recovery suite was dim and quiet, save for the rhythmic, reassuring hum of the life support monitors. Evelyn was sitting in a vinyl chair by the window, quietly charting his morning vitals on a tablet. The general blinked against the harsh fluorescent light, his gaze shifting slowly around the unfamiliar room until it locked onto Evelyn. A weak, raspy chuckle escaped his dry throat, immediately followed by a sharp wince of pain from his fractured ribs. "Parker," he rasped, his voice barely more than a gravelly whisper. "Why is it, every single time I try to die, you're always the one standing there in my way?" Evelyn looked up, a genuine warm smile breaking through the heavy mask of exhaustion she had worn for 3 days. She walked over to the side of his bed, gently adjusting his intravenous line and checking his pulse. "Someone has to keep you in line, sir. You have a terrible, expensive habit of breaking perfectly good military helicopters." The general's tired eyes softened with profound, unspoken gratitude. He took a slow, painful breath. "Colonel Miller told me what happened while I was under. He told me about you being banished to the basement. He told me about the civilian doctor who nearly fried my heart." The general's jaw tightened, the familiar, terrifying authority returning to his demeanor despite his severe injuries. "Fetch me my chief of staff, Lieutenant. We have a mess to clean up." The resulting reckoning came swiftly, and it came without a single shred of mercy. General Hayes, even while confined to a hospital bed with tubes in his chest, wielded absolute, uncompromising authority. Within 24 hours of his awakening, a full military tribunal and an independent medical board inquiry were officially convened to investigate the surgical department. Dr. Robert Sterling, the anesthesiologist, was the first to step forward. He formally and aggressively retracted his previous administratively coerced statement regarding Corporal Miller's botched surgery. He testified under oath that Evelyn had correctly and swiftly diagnosed the fatal splenic hemorrhage on the ultrasound, and that Dr. Harrison Montgomery had willfully, stubbornly ignored her accurate warnings, prioritizing his massive ego over the young soldier's rapidly deteriorating condition. The initial autopsy report of the corporal was immediately seized and re-examined by a team of independent, out-of-state military medical examiners. Their findings confirmed Evelyn's initial assessment beyond a shadow of a doubt. Colonel James Henderson and Chief of Nursing Brenda Wallace were unceremoniously called before the base commander's investigative committee. Brenda broke down in tears, expressing deep, profound remorse, admitting she had cowardly yielded to intense administrative pressure to protect a high-value, highly paid civilian contractor. Because of her previous good record, she was allowed to keep her license, but was demoted from her administrative role. Colonel Henderson, however, found himself formally reprimanded, stripped of his comfortable administrative authority, and quietly, swiftly transferred to a desk job in a freezing remote logistics outpost in northern Alaska. The hospital administration's desperate attempt to bury a fatal surgical mistake had been violently and publicly unearthed. As for Dr. Harrison Montgomery, his departure from Joint Base Andrews Medical Center was devoid of any grace or dignity. His lucrative multi-million-dollar contract was terminated with immediate prejudice. The formal charges cited gross medical negligence, cowardice under extreme pressure, and intentionally falsifying official incident reports to cover up a preventable death. As Montgomery was escorted off the military base by the very same stern military police officers he had once smugly called to remove Evelyn from his operating room, he looked incredibly small, broken, and entirely defeated. His designer scrubs were gone, replaced by civilian clothes that seemed to hang off his suddenly diminished frame. He was now facing a ruthless civilian medical board review that would almost certainly strip him of his surgical license permanently, and the grieving family of Corporal Miller was preparing a massive, inescapable, wrongful death lawsuit with the full backing and legal support of the United States military. Evelyn Parker, on the other hand, experienced a very different kind of reckoning. Exactly 1 month later, she was officially summoned to General Hayes's newly rebuilt office. Standing at perfect military attention in her pristine dress uniform, she was proudly awarded the Meritorious Service Medal in front of the entire cheering hospital staff. But more importantly, she was officially named the new head of trauma nursing for the entire medical center, given absolute authority over emergency surgical protocols. As she confidently walked back into OR 4 that afternoon, snapping on her sterile surgical gloves for a complex procedure, the room fell completely silent. But this time, it wasn't a tense silence born of fear or intimidation. It was a silence of absolute, unquestioned respect. If you were on the edge of your seat during this incredible story of justice and medical drama, make sure to hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on these intense real-life stories. Share this video with a friend who loves a good comeback story and drop a comment below telling us what you would have done in Evelyn's shoes. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.